The history of their escape and complicated destiny of their report are well known and reconstructed, but they are also interpreted in a different way. Therefore, I will focus not on a description of their escape, and you also know the report. I will rather try to present several notes and questions, sometimes controversial, that are about the most important facts, and especially the after-war interpretation of this unique act. Both domestic and foreign literature, memoirs, and film documents, we can see a lot of contradictory claims, which we historians must confront critically and look for the reasons of these discrepancies. Well, I will now alibistically help myself by a quotation by Pierre Lamoureux. For some, history means the account of past events, an account that is dry and precise. But this concept is not good. History is whatever, but not exact. Talking about the past is almost equally unreliable as talking about the future, because the dates in the records and documents can be contradictory. Historians can't agree on anything or anyone. I think this characteristics is very apt for the case of interpreting their escape and report. Vrba and Wetzler are in the book of history in a very strange way. Some people need years and years for that. And using the words of Stefan Zweig, they lived their stellar hours, which were basically inserted into 3 weeks period, from 7th of April until the end of April 1944. This was the 3 weeks when they escaped and wrote the report. These 3 weeks changed their personal lives, as well as the interpretation of the entire event. These stellar hours they lived through and co-created last until nowadays. I believe that this is one of the most important journeys when learning the act of Vrba and Wetzler with its positive and negative aspects. Or not negative, but perhaps contradictory. Polish historian Tadeusz Iwasko says that between 1940 to January 1945, originally a prisoner camp, 667 prisoners escaped, which not necessarily is an exact final number. Out of these prisoners, as is documented, 270 persons were captured, and they were basically tortured and executed. Not that much for escaping, but rather for the possibility of bringing a message. 397 prisoners, we have no information about them. Probably Many of them ended up by not surviving. They might have died at various occasions. Wetzler and Vrba joined these escapees, but they had a very strange destiny. The majority of the prisoners escaped because they wanted to save themselves, but Wetzler and Vrba wanted to bring a message. That's what we talked about. They were not escaping as soloists. Their escape was prepared by quite a lot of other prisoners directly in the camp who did a certain selection why these two should escape. They prepared the logistic backgrounds for the escape, supporting them with food, medicine, and all the necessary things that were needed during the escape. And this should be highlighted. It was not an escape of some solo escapees. In addition, the inmates prepared the documentation, graphs, numbers, drawings, so that these can be taken out of the camp. Another thing is that the refugees, the escapees, didn't manage to take all the prepared things out. They lost some of these documents, and when they were writing the report, they had to rely on their memory first of all. The drawings and the report are mostly based on what they had remembered then. Wetzler spent 2 years and Vrba 22 months in Auschwitz. We can't say that all the data included in the report is absolute. Even they made mistakes. We can see that in 1946, Wetzler, using the name Robert Lánik as a cover name, published a brochure, a little book, based on the report entitled Oswiecim, Auschwitz, the tomb of 4 million people. But this was a big mistake because, according to the research, we know that about 1.5 million people died, majority of whom Jews. So this is not an intentional misinformation by Wetzler or Vrba, but people didn't know much about Majdanek. Everybody knew about Auschwitz. We only knew about the existence of other camps. So this was the source of inaccuracy. Regarding the stellar hours of both escapees, very shortly after the escape, they wrote the report here in Žilina, at the premises where we were yesterday, and this report was sent to Hungary immediately, where the Jewish community leaders had it no later than by early May. It was also sent to the Vatican and Switzerland, from where it was distributed by Czechoslovak diplomat serving for London exile government, distributed to the United States and Great Britain, unfortunately. And it's quite strange and weird that that report traveled to the Vatican for a couple of months. Now, briefly about the main actors of the escape. Both of them were selected due to their physical strength and moral disposition. And also, this is not a coincidence. They ran to Slovakia. Why? Because Slovakia was closest to Auschwitz. In spring 1944, Slovakia was still not occupied by Nazi Germany. So it was the nearest unoccupied country to Auschwitz. And the Slovak regime was in deep crisis those days. There were still some attempts to restart deportations, because propaganda was still saying that the remaining Jews in Slovakia are enemies and should be deported. Wetzler and Vrba's personalities were characterized by differences. Despite the fact that during the escape they had to cooperate together. Wetzler was 6 years older and he was more rationally based, while Vrba was explosive and adventurous, with a strong egocentric feeling, and it has been proven by his later interpretation of this escape. A historian is facing a very sensitive issue, not to touch the memory and the memory of their relatives. So even some critical words about their escape and its actors is in no way any devaluation or reduction of their courage. But a historian always must judge and proceed in a rational way. Their after-war destinies were different. Vrba emigrated in 1958 from Czechoslovakia, and basically for the regime those days he was non-existing. Wetzler lived here in a decent social position, and they might have both met, because they were witnesses in the so-called Auschwitz trials in Frankfurt am Main in 1963 or 4. They both testified. In 70s and 80s, the Holocaust topic was a taboo. This taboo, at about the same time, together, Wetzler at home and Vrba abroad, broke the taboo because Wetzler published a book under the pseudonym What Dante Didn't See, which was his memoirs of the escape. The leading Slovak literary historian and critic says that it was the best thing written about this issue in Slovakia. And I will now give a quotation. Wetzler presented his memories without any sentiment, with humanistic efforts and enthusiasm. For those of you who read his testimony before the Frankfurt court, shortly before publication of this book, Vrba published a book in 1963 entitled I Can't Forget, co-written by Alan Bestick. This book was also published later, entitled 44070. It was his number tattooed on his forearm. Conspiracy of the 20th Century. This book was translated to the Czech language in 1997, but without the co-author A. Bestick, despite the fact that it is the same book. In the 1970s, Wetzler was in social isolation, and he refused to give any information about the escape. Despite the fact that during those days Vrba became a source of information for many documentarists and a key witness of this escape. I don't know what he told them, but in some works of these Western historians and journalists, Wetzler is somehow cornered a bit, and some works don't even mention him. So the reader, who is uninformed, might think that everything was only Vrba's work. I will again use a quotation by Slovak Israeli historian Jelinek, who says, "After the war, various legends and interpretations started to spread about their escape. This was the responsibility of one of them, Rosenberg, who used the fact that Wetzler stayed in Slovakia, and there was no one to oppose Rosenberg's version. Even Jelinek is not downgrading Jelinek's, Rosenberg's task. This is only the interpretation of a certain act which has lasted until nowadays." I think that Vrba's act and Wetzler's act was so unique and unrepeatable in a way that it doesn't need any more idealization. It is a legend itself, so we do not have to add more legendary issues to that. When we know about the revisionist literature, which can get a grip of these facts and abuse it. Now, few words about the ambiguous interpretation of the Auschwitz report. Miroslav Kárný, the Czech historian, says, "This report does not want to be a historical document or an epitaph for Auschwitz victims. It wants to be a warning for mankind. Therefore, it is not understandable why this report was not responded to by the superpowers." Jano Hlavinka said that why did Allies not bomb Auschwitz? This was not real. The question is, why didn't they bomb the access roads? I'm not sure what report did Russians have about this Auschwitz report. The report was elaborated before the D-Day, and Russians were much closer to Auschwitz. Did they know about this report? All of that has been known, or was known those days. And one more sensitive issue. We often hear that this report saved thousands, hundreds and thousands of Hungarian Jews. I am not a skeptic about that. How? When this report arrived to Budapest, to Kestner and company, they were already in forced contact with Eichmann, who requested the well-known trade blood for goods, or trucks for Jews. They were already reporting that they didn't need information. Maybe there were some detailed information from the report, but they already knew what was going on because Eichmann was threatening them openly. If they are not going to do the trade, 12,000 Jews will die, will be deported to Auschwitz every day. In addition, there is one more argument. I don't think that Wetzler and Vrba were escaping only with the intention to save Hungarian Jews. Hungary was already occupied. But their report does not say any single sentence regarding threat to Hungarian Jews. Why? I don't know. This is rather questions, and I don't want to downgrade the importance of their escape or report. Deportations of Hungarian Jews were stopped in July 1944. Maybe the report played its role, but until then 40,000 Hungarian Jews had been deported and killed. Deportations from Slovakia were stopped in autumn 1942 based on the order by President Tiso, which is a nonsense. Sorry, I'm a bit overdue. To conclude, we have to say that the escape of Wetzler and Vrba is one of the most significant displays of European Jewish resistance in the history of Holocaust. Resistance was also in this form. At the same time, it carries a certain ethical message that no political power that executes evil and violates basic human rights can never think that its acts and crimes will be secret forever. And one last comment. Wetzler and Vrba were helped by dozens of people during their escape from the camp and here in Slovakia, who endangered their lives and lives of their families. And these people did not ask whether Vrba-Wetzler came from Slovakia, whether they were Jews or whatever. They just helped. And now the question, you see what is happening with refugees these days. We are starting to select, are they Catholic, Christians? And we forget that they are people who need help. Thank you.